Happy Tuesday, ladies and gentlemen. If it's Tuesday evening, it must be the Idle Zone Syndicate. Live and in person with spouses in tow.
Some of
the Valentine's Day edition.
Yeah. What's up?
And then we have an awkward silence right off the bat.
Get it out of the way.
Oh, geez.
Well,
it's turning winter again, and not much, and I don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't either. I'm ready for it to be over.
Amen to that.
As you can tell, I have a cold, have a cough, have a sore throat. So, and I think Kyle has the same thing. He's on muted.
I'll be all right, but we're getting through it. Just a wimp.
Yeah.
Dude,
yeah.
Get away. Get away. Mike.
Uh-oh. Was he naked? I think he was naked.
Yeah, he just got out of the shower, and he just, of course, runs through here.
That's funny. That is funny.
We're going to get kicked off of YouTube.
Yeah, we'll be canceled for tonight.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so because it is Valentine's week, we thought we'd have our spouses on, some of them.
Hello.
Yeah.
And naked boys.
Yeah, half naked now,
What's
thankfully.
going on? Where's your spouse, Kyle?
She just got home with the kids, and she is in the process of doing some scrubbing in the bathtub as we speak. So
I'm going to be right back.
Okay.
Mine's at a pottery class, so she's.
And Wendy's just went to the restroom.
Oh, there you go.
So we'll start. We just thought we'd have our better halves on here for a few minutes, and even though they're not in the picture, we'll start with you guys, Kyle and Kyle. So start with Kyle, Cranker. How long have you guys been married?
Let's see. This year will be 11 years. No, 12 years. We are at 11 years.
Nice.
Yeah. So, been going good.
I thought we'd have a couple questions. How long have you been married, and how did y'all meet?
We met at Dillon's where we worked together. Because I worked for Dillon's for 15 and a half years. She worked for Dillon's and Kroger for about the same time. So, but yeah, we met. I was just out of high school, basically. So.
Was it a long, drawn out courtship, or was it?
Oh, yeah. She will tell you the story of how long it took for me to ask her to marry me.
That's why we wanted her on.
Oh, yeah. She'd tell you that I have too many fishing poles, and that's why she never got a ring. That's exactly what she would tell you.
All right.
Me and the tackle warehouse guy were on a first name basis.
Yeah.
Or UPS guy, I should say.
Yeah. Kyle?
What's up?
How long have you guys been married?
A long time. 10 years. 10 years. 10 years.
10 years.
Dated for about 5, and was getting the threats. If you don't do something, you better, kind of deal. Of course, I worked at Alber's. Her brother worked next door at the convenience store, And about every evening I'd go over there, and I kind of had a little bit of a habit with a scratch off ticket. And it was, fun talking with Matt, and just dumb question. You got any family? You got a sister or anything? He said he did. A couple of days later, I seen her on the road, and I knew it was her because he was pretty willing to tell, oh, she likes to walk up and down this street at this time and yada, yada, yada. Well, I just stopped and said, hey, what's up? After a couple of days of driving by, and, it's all over now. Got 2 kids, Julia and Max. Max is going to be 7 this year. Julia just turned 3. And I kind of wonder if maybe he's going to be the one that likes to play the sports, and maybe my youngest is going to be the fisher. But we shall see. And it's been fun. 15 years, a long time, and it flies by. I can tell you guys that for sure.
Yeah. Wendy?
Well, they dated for 5 years. You missed that part.
I missed that part.
Yeah.
My
Maybe.
apologies, cast and crew, for my quick exit.
Devin said you were pooping.
Well,
Mhm.
since we've already evil Knieveled the thing, I'm just going to go ahead and toss out that if the bag of salad in your refrigerator has expired, and some of the leaves may or may not be discolored, go ahead and throw it out. Don't be a tightwad and eat it for lunch.
Yeah, that's not a good plan.
So there, the more you know. That's where I am.
True story. True story.
That's fine. So we've asked the 2 above you question, how long have you been married and how did you meet? And I was going to have their spouses tell the story, but since they're not here, they didn't have to.
We can't tell ours.
Crank did tell his spouse's version of the story.
Mhm.
So now it's Wendy's turn because we're going around the oldest is last.
This year we will have been married 30 years. And
Wow.
yeah,
In a
in
row.
a row to each other. Yeah. We met at a bar in town called McGraw's.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Danny actually knew my brother. I believe you met Jeff at, was it Walmart?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I did same thing. I knew her brother.
Yeah.
For probably a year before I knew her.
Yeah. And our first date lasted 3 days. So
Thank you very much.
So there's that.
Outstanding.
We dated a year before we got married. And then along came Connor James. I'd say he was a preemie at 8 pounds, 10 ounces, but he was not. So yeah.
Very good.
Nice.
So yeah.
Last but not least, Mr. John and Valerie, how y'all doing?
Well, thank you.
Well, let's hear it. How did it all start, Valerie?
Well, we've been married. It'll be 38 years this year. It started back in the 80s. 85 is when we first met, I think. Yep. No, it was 84. Well, no, we didn't meet that in 84. We met at Cloud County Community College in Concordia, Kansas, home of the Thunderbirds.
Some of the Thunderbirds.
That's
Yeah.
about it.
That's it.
That's all I
That's your
got.
version.
That's my version. The rest has been bliss with marital bliss.
Mm.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yep.
Just following them all over the country. It's my job.
Understand that.
Got to keep them in line.
Yep.
Mhm. All right, Danny, what's your version of how you met? Because she left out a few parts. She just said 3 days.
We're still G rated, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, geez, how to tiptoe around this deal. Her parents have been gone over 10 years. I haven't had to walk on eggshells or tiptoe or anything around this subject for at least 10 years. I guess it's the best way to put it is obviously we hit it off right off the bat.
Love at first sight.
Pretty much.
And
I mean,
my mom did ask me if I told her I had a date, and she said a few days later, she's like, "Where have you been?" I said, "Well, I told her I had a date." She's like, "Oh, so it wasn't just a meal?" I was like, "No, it was a date."
it was 3 days.
She's like, "For 3 days?" I said, "Yeah."
With an S on the end.
Right. I said, "Yeah." So she's like, "Okay." So yeah, it wasn't just a meal. It was a date.
Dates.
It was an event, it sounds like. An
Yeah.
event.
It was an event. So yeah.
I
And it
can
was
appreciate
funny.
that.
They lived next door, kind of, on the farm. So yeah, it was kind of funny.
Yeah. So the whole time we were dating, she and her brother lived in the grandparents' house on the farm, and mom and dad still lived in their house. It's about 150 yards apart. And sometime when we're all having cocktail hour, maybe we could share some of those stories, but we're not going to share them now.
Till another time, I guess, huh?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
we would have viewers, but we would probably not have any sponsors.
That's funny. Was yours love at first sight, Kyle? Kyle and Kyle?
I would say so for me, yeah. But
Absolutely
Yeah.
is the answer. Absolutely.
Just like we were, guys. Good job.
Yeah. That's right.
Me too. Me too. I was a year ahead of her in class at Cloud County. And I didn't make it back to my second year. Y'all know what I mean.
Mhm.
But made a lot of good friends that first year, roommates and stuff. And so I came back to visit old roommates, and we were in one of them's apartment on campus. They had they weren't really dorms. They were like apartments, like 3-bedroom apartments or 2-bedroom apartments. And they were double level things. And that was the campus housing. So I was in one of their apartments, and her and somebody else came over, I don't know, to borrow some sugar, I'm sure, or beer or something. And she came in and she was just in sweats and a t-shirt.
Oh yeah.
And then she left. And I turned to my buddy and I'm like, who was that? And he said, if you knew me in high school or college, I always had the mantra that it wasn't conceit if it was true. That was my right. So their response to when I said, who was that, was, don't even think about it. She doesn't date anybody. She won't go out with anybody. We've tried. Somebody in the room had tried. And I said, y'all don't remember who you're dealing with. And it was a challenge to get her to go out with me, between me and the other guys. And that's what happened.
Now, were you singing in the band at this time?
I was in the band. Or no, I wasn't in the band. The band had camped. The band had disbanded because I was in Colorado. She did see me in the band the year before, like when she was up on a visit or something.
Okay.
But apparently it wasn't love at first sight for her, because she didn't like come try to be a groupie or anything. So but we had there was a bar called the Rock Quarry. It was like everybody, the dance where everybody went to dance. And that was the goal, was that night to get her to dance with me. And I did. And that was all she wrote.
Yep.
Been together ever since.
Cool.
That's it.
So that was in 85.
Yes.
So
We're married in 87.
so we've been dating or together for 40 years.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That's an awesome achievement nowadays, for sure.
I mean,
That is.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And like she said, she just been super supportive and just followed me all over the country, with the job at Bass and all that. Had to uproot the family several times, so appreciate it.
Glad to do it, honey. This is the last time.
the last time.
Yeah.
Probably not, but sounds good.
We'll get you on some other time. Maybe all the ladies can just do it one night by themselves.
Yeah, no, it would not be well.
It'll be a lot shorter.
10-minute show tonight.
Great.
Probably won't be 2.5 hours.
That's true. I don't know. Once you get going,
No.
It probably won't be
Once the stories start flowing.
around.
once you get going, once you get the other two in there,
This is
who
true.
knows how long it'll go.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to keep you, because this 20 minutes was way longer than she expected to be on here. So
Mhm.
Not that I have anywhere to be, just not on here.
True story.
Oh, well, Val, didn't John tell you we planned 45?
No, he said 10.
I did say 5 or 10, but I knew it would be long.
But that's okay. It's been an honor
Well, ladies, it was great to see you.
seeing you.
Val, I think I'll probably see you before I'll get to see Wendy.
Probably.
Okay.
So
You coming down?
Oh yeah, I'm ready. I'm so ready for it to turn warm or at least try to get warm. I'll enjoy spring, but this ice that's forming on the deck right now is not funny.
It's gross.
You get to stay home then tonight or tomorrow?
No, duty calls.
Oh,
Yep.
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate you.
Good to
Just
see you.
remember, Valentine's Day is on Friday.
Yes.
Yep.
Happy
Yeah.
Valentine's Day.
See you, Val.
Bye.
Bye, sweet crack.
You know, I don't have a ton of stats for this special guest, but I do have an introduction. So on your guys' queue,
Go for it. Bring him in.
we have a National Conservation Director at Bassmaster. If you go to the WOW Museum, he is in the Freshwater Hall of Fame. He has 7.2 thousand members on the Bass Conservation Facebook page, which is really cool. He calls Oklahoma his home. Mr. Gene Gilliland.
Hey, Gene.
Evening.
Buddy. You're on mute. Hey,
There
there
we go.
you go.
There we are.
I had it on my laptop and it just completely froze. So now I'm on my cell phone. So hopefully this will still work.
Oh, it's good.
Yep.
Now,
So
I-
before we get into it, though, so how long have you and Pat been married?
42 years.
42.
Yep. We my quick story is we met in college. Both of us went to Texas A&M and wound up having they had the county we were from had a party. And I met her at one of these parties. And it turns out that semester we wound up having a class together. And as it turns out, we grew up 9 miles from each other, but we were in two different school districts, little rural towns in North Texas. And so we didn't know each other until we got to college. And so we dated during college, and then eventually I came to Oklahoma to work on a graduate degree at Oklahoma State. And after I got finished with my master's degree, we wound up getting married, and I got a job like a month after I got out of college, and she wound up finishing up her degree at A&M and moved up to Oklahoma and got a job with the newspaper in Oklahoma City. So I worked for the Oklahoma Wildlife Department, and she worked for the newspaper, both of us for over 30 years. And she retired a few years ago officially. And then I retired the first time from the Wildlife Department 11 years ago now, and took the job with BASS. So that's our story.
That's a good one.
But you know what, Kyle, you said something about calling Oklahoma home. We don't. We've lived here 40 years, but we are still Texans, and in fact are planning to officially retire sometime in the not too distant future and move back to Texas to my old family, what's left of my family farm.
Nice.
It's been in the family for 4 generations, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That would be cool.
Kind of sounds like me. You know, I live in Arma, but I still call Cherryville my home. It's not too far away, but that's kind of the way I'd put it too. So,
yeah.
And I don't have anything bad to say about Texas either. There's some good fishing down there. I can tell you that. Of course, I'm pretty sure you probably already have a good idea of that.
Yeah. The farm that we'll be living on is oh, let me think. It's about 20 miles from Ray Roberts. It's about 20 miles from Lake Texoma. A couple little city lakes that are probably within 10 miles. And then I'm part owner of a, I guess you call it a club lake that's actually in Oklahoma, but just barely. There's 30 of us that are members of this private lake, and so I've got lots of opportunities right there, fairly close. Big lakes and small lakes.
Very cool.
Guys, I'm having a terrible time coughing, so I'm gonna if I have something to say, I'll jump in, but I'm gonna let you guys ask the questions if you don't mind.
Well, cool. The first thing I was going to say is that now, see, we made Gene sit backstage and listen to all of our stories, and unfortunately, he now has stuff he can hold over us in the future.
Technically, everybody that's watching has the same opportunity to hold those things over.
True,
you.
true.
It's not just me.
Well, Gene, the last time I saw you, we were at Mr. Stewart's, and I was serving the armadillo chili,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I'd had a few cocktails, but what's new and exciting on the front that we need to be aware of?
Well, it's this has been a tumultuous, I guess you'd say, off season from the not having any tournaments and things to go to yet. Although I leave Monday for Florida for the first 2 elite tournaments, but our off season over the winter was we had some controversies and things crop up here and there. I guess the biggest one that we've been dealing with is a proposal for a big slot limit on the Coosa River in Alabama, and that's not at all tournament friendly. It's the science that was done to determine what needed to be done to make the fishing better is good science. It's just the remedy is something that the tournament organizations just can't hardly live with. It's a 16 to 20 inch slot limit, and so unless you're doing a catch, weigh, and release kind of thing, it's going to make the traditional, 5-fish weigh-in type tournaments very difficult. So, and there's legislation being introduced to ban the state Fish and Wildlife Agency from passing any new regulations. It's getting kind of nasty, is what it is, and it's the kind of thing that I sent my boss an email kind of explaining, keeping them up to date on what's going on, and I said this is the kind of thing that makes me want to retire. Having to deal with this kind of stuff. So,
what is the reasoning behind the Alabama DNR or whatever? Why are they saying it's needed?
Especially on Neely Henry Lake, they've been getting for several years a lot of complaints about the quality of the bass fishing, size of fish. Declining, not necessarily numbers as much as it is size. And so they contracted with Auburn for a 4-year study. And what they basically found out was that there's lots and lots and lots of tournaments on those lakes. They're not very big lakes. And the delayed mortality, the mortality of bass related to bass tournaments is pretty significant. And when you think about we don't fish for the little ones, in bass tournaments. You always people want to bring in the biggest ones. And so it's kind of cropping off the bigger fish at a faster rate than the little fish. And obviously it takes longer to replace those big fish. And so their conclusions were that the best way to try to help the fishery recover is to put this slot limit on there, which protects those, 16 to 20 inch fish, which gives them a chance to grow up and become, better quality size fish after a few years. And so it's, but when you think about a typical bass tournament, you've got a 5 fish limit that weighs, 4.5 pounds, because all you can keep are the little ones. Or if you happen to catch one of those more rare large fish, somebody comes in with a 6-pounder that gets kind of that lucky bite and might win a tournament where, compared to the guy that's caught 5, but he's got 5 little ones. So, it's not an easy situation to fix. And, the most of the people we're dealing with or that we've talked to, that they'll admit there's probably too many tournaments. And because you can fish a tournament almost every day of the week, weeknight, jackpots, weekends, some of the bigger trails come there. And these are, Neely Henry, most of those Coosa River lakes are not very big. They're 10, 12,000 acres. It's not like a Grand Lake, or in their case, like a Pickwick or a Guntersville, where you've got, 60,000 acres of water. And so you put these pretty large tournaments, and that would include like the high school tournaments that are, 200 boats on these small lakes. It's taken a toll on the quality of the fishing. And it's like I say, it's kind of gotten political now, and I don't know. I think, as I understood it, some of the legislation is actually going to be debated in their committees tomorrow, or starting tomorrow, to decide whether or not the legislature can pass something that prohibits the DNR from setting these kinds of regulations. So the thing that we tried for several months to do was get the agency to bring all of the players together and have kind of a stakeholder meetings, not just the bass tournaments, but the people that don't like bass tournaments, and the people like the chambers of commerce that like tournaments to come to their town because of the economic impact, and the lake associations that don't like the tournaments because the lakes are too crowded. Get representatives from all those groups together and see if there's some other solutions. It may be that this slot limit is the best thing that has to happen, but there might be maybe some hybrid solutions or some sort of other regulations that would maybe limit the number of tournaments or the times of year or some things like that. And we just never could get any traction with getting those kind of meetings put together. And so the state agency, their commission, or they call it the Conservation Advisory Board, meets in March to discuss whether or not to implement this recommended length limit. And so that'll be actually the next opportunity for public comment. So
does Bassmaster have a stance on this?
Yeah, our traditional tournaments, and we have tournaments on the Coosa River we don't have any this year, just coincidentally, but certainly, we're in negotiations with some of those communities for future events. And our typical tournament is a 12 or 14-inch minimum length limit. So this slot limit would pretty much prohibit us from having any tournaments unless we were to, drastically change something about how we were doing those events. Something like we do maybe at Lake Fork, where they have a big slot. We have a tournament there where we do the catch, weigh, and release format, but the anglers can bring in one big fish over the slot. But in those tournaments, we have an observer in every boat, a judge that actually helps weigh the fish. If you have say an open or a high school tournament with 200 and something boats, that just doesn't work. And so, like I say, our position was we would like to have more debate on the proposal and maybe look at all of the potential options and talk to all of the players and see, if they could live with other types of restrictions, maybe that would on the number of boats or the number of tournaments, or certainly we know that the mortality is greater in the summertime than it is in the cooler weather. One thing that we kind of kicked around was the idea of a fish care certification program, because we know that the weigh-in process can be part of the problem, but a lot of the issue is what happens to those fish in the live well for 4, 5, 6, 8 hours. And if they're not cared for well in the live well, then the first aid that the tournament staff provides at the weigh-in may not be enough to keep those fish healthy, and so they may not survive. So we thought, well, maybe we could have some sort of required, fish care training, kind of like boater certification. Some like Bass requires that now for all of the events that Bass holds, that you have to have a boater safety certification. You take an online class, and you get a little card or something that says you've passed the test. Maybe we come up with something like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of different options that have been thrown out. We have not been involved in any of this political stuff. That's all coming from local organizations, local bass clubs and chambers of commerce and groups like that. Because Bass wants to be. We kind of got to ride that fence a little bit. We want to be good neighbors with our communities. We want to help them from an economic standpoint, but we also want to support scientific fishery management and make sure that the resource that our tournaments depend on stays healthy. Because if we don't have good bass fishing, we don't have a business. And so, we've got to balance that kind of stuff out. And that's where we are right now. Looking for that balance.
Mhm.
Has there been any talks about like Kansas has the Bass Pass and Oklahoma has the permit that you got to get? And I know the big thing with doing something like that is you got to have some kind of enforcement, and I can see that being an issue in Alabama.
Yeah.
Where you have a little jackpot every day of the week on Logan Martin. How are you going to police that?
Well, that's some of the questions that we've asked, that we had hoped to be able to have a roundtable discussion of people to be able to talk about some of those kind of things and look at some options. I know the state that like many other states, they're strapped for money. They don't have a big staff. I kind of wonder if they put this length limit into place, are they going to have a game warden show up at every tournament weigh-in and measure fish? Because it only applies to tournament anglers. It's not across the board to all anglers, which to me is another kind of problem. It, being an issue of fairness, that if you're going to put a length limit out there, it ought to be on everybody. But so there's a lot of those kind of options that have been thrown around, but we've never had the group discussion to talk about them and see, what really makes sense, what's feasible, what works from an economic standpoint, from and certainly from the state standpoint. They're charged, in the Constitution, it says they're supposed to protect the resources for all fishermen, not just bass anglers. And so that's what their biologists have been charged with doing. They, and so that's what their recommendations are. And I get it. I was in their shoes for a long time, and it's a really tough situation trying to create that balance between protecting the resource and what may be kind of short-term goals for some of these organizations that in my view, you gotta think about it long term. And I know the chambers of commerce, the tourism agencies, they depend on, in a lot of cases, those tournament organizations bring money into town, and that's a big deal to them. So, somewhere we got to try to strike that balance.
Agreed. So we're getting ready to kick off the season. As you stated, you're heading to Florida soon, and a lot of the BFL was last weekend at Grand, so things are starting to kick off for the year.
Yeah.
Gene, just as a refresher for all the boaters and the co's for that matter, basic tournament live well setup, live well care throughout the day.
Keeping your fish healthy is very much dependent on water temperature. And this time of year, when the water's cool to cold, it's relatively easy to keep your fish healthy. Where we get into trouble is when you get into the summertime, when the water temperatures are in our part of the country, in the 75 degrees and up. So, by the time we get into May and on through the summer, that's where where the issues come, and the anglers just have to be a lot more conscientious at that point. This time of year, you can get away with turning your freshwater pumps on and just pumping fresh water. But as the water gets warmer and warmer, then you got to start doing more. And I will put in a plug for the website. People will go to bassmaster.com, and in the little search bar up at the top, type in "Keeping Bass Alive," and it'll take you to the instruction manual on how to operate your live well system. And it talks about what to do under different conditions, whether it's cool water or whether you get into the hot weather. And I will say I'm in the process of updating that. The version that's on, we originally wrote that in 2003, And what's on the website now is a 2008 version. And I've got a brand new version that is on the editor's desk right now in Birmingham. And it's got a little bit of new information. I think it's a little easier to digest. And there's actually two parts. The first part is for anglers. What do you do in the boat? The second part that's in this new version that'll be up on the website, hopefully this spring, is what tournament directors need to do at the weigh-in. Because if you have a really bad weigh-in, what the anglers have done, even if they've tried to take care of their fish, you can undo it with a bad weigh-in. Conversely, like I said earlier, if the anglers don't take care of their fish, the first aid the tournament directors give may not be enough. So you got to have both parts of that to make things work. And so that's in this newest version of Keeping Bass Alive that I hope we will have up on the website in the next month or two. But that's the easiest thing to tell people, just to go to that, and it lays it out. And there have been several studies that have been done over the past several years evaluating the effectiveness of our recommendations. And like I said, we wrote it in 2003, and there's not a whole lot different. It still works. And the studies have proven that those recommendations can help keep more fish alive during and after the tournament. And that's really the whole key. And that's what the Auburn study in Alabama showed, is that, a significant number of these fish die several days after they're released. And so they swim away. And the anglers and the tournament directors make the assumption that I did everything right. The fish swam away, they must be okay. And yet we find out that they die several days later. And people say, well, I don't see bass floating all over the lake, 2 or 3 days later. Well, the studies we didn't see but about half of them that even floated. And so a lot of those fish, you never see again. So that delayed mortality is kind of invisible. And so fishermen for years have figured that I must be doing things right. And of course, everybody on the internet has their own YouTube version of here's how I take care of my fish, because I've never had a dead fish in my live well. And they don't know what happens to those fish 2 or 3 days later.
Right.
And so that's kind of the nasty part of this behind the scenes stuff that people just don't see.
Gene, is there any facts that that say is what the number one cause of a delayed mortality in a fish is?
Hot water.
Hot water.
It's water temperature the mortality is directly related to water temperature. The higher the water temperature, the more fish are going to die. And at some point, it's in a live well situation, hot water typically means less oxygen. So there you got kind of a double whammy. The hot water messes up their systems, and then if they're deprived of oxygen, that creates other problems. And so when you add all these little pieces of stress, of course they've been handled, they've been banged around, they've been, they're in a strange environment, they've been over exercised, I guess you could say. And you add all of those things up, and it just screws up their physiology to the point where it's kind of, the straw that broke the camel's back kind of thing, that it may not kill them right away, but it messes them up bad enough that 2 or 3 days later, they die. And they swim off. And the bad part is even trained biologists have a hard time recognizing when a fish is in that condition that it's not going to survive. I mean, there's some of them you can look at them, you can pretty much tell, okay, this one ain't going to make it. Let's put it in the cooler, donate that fish or take it home, whatever. But there's a lot of them that you can't tell. And they swim away, and you make the assumption that they're going to be okay. So that makes it tough. But water temperature, and that's, when we get into the hot summertime, that's where we talk about using ice and recirculating your live well and doing some things like that, that the anglers have to be a lot more conscientious. You can't just put them in the live well, flip a switch, and forget about them for 8 hours. And it just takes a lot more care and time to keep them healthy. And I will say that more and more people I hear, and I talk to people, and I see things on the internet where there are more people that are that stuff is starting to sink in, and they're paying more attention to that. And but it just and this Auburn study is really one of the first ones, and I'll admit that we for many years we used to always say that, yeah, we know there's delayed mortality, bass die at tournaments. But until this study came out, we always told people that bass tournaments are really not hurting the bass population. That yes, individual fish die. And, when you think about the thousands of bass in a lake, the numbers that die because of tournaments is a pretty small percentage. But like I said earlier, what this study is showing is when you've got really high pressure, lots and lots of tournaments on fairly small lakes, what we're doing apparently is, at least in that situation, is kind of cropping off the bigger fish. And I always kind of use the pyramid analogy, that the fish population is like a pyramid. You got lots of fish down at the bottom, and fewer and fewer and fewer as you go towards the top. Well, what we're doing in this case, what they found in that tournament, is that we're kind of cropping that top off. There's still a lot of fish down here, but that top, those bigger fish are dying at a little faster rate, and it takes longer. It takes a while to grow a 5-pounder. And that's where we're getting into trouble. And I got a feeling that next week there is a fisheries meeting in Asheville, North Carolina. And I suspect that quite a number of the biologists from a lot of other states, and at least in the southeastern kind of part of the United States, will be all talking to each other. They'll be looking at this study and saying, I wonder if that's happening to some of our lakes. And this may spur some more research projects in other places. And you guys, John's sitting right there on the shore of Grand Lake. I have thought forever, why does Grand Lake not produce more 7, 8, 9-pound bass? I mean, I fished up there for 30-something years. There's times when you can walk on the shad. It's not a food problem. What is it possibly because there's so many tournaments that the big fish are not surviving as well? I don't know. I've always kind of wondered about that sort of thing. And then when this Auburn study came out, it's like, I wonder if that's maybe kind of what's happening up there. I don't know. But then you take a Sam Rayburn, where it's cranking out 10 and 12 pounders, and it has hundreds and hundreds of tournaments a year. But
that was going to be my question, Gene, is, with that example you just give about Grand, then okay, then how does Texas do it? You know what I mean?
You know, Sam Rayburn's 153,000 acres. It's 3 times the size of Grand Lake. Okay. Toledo Bend's 4 times the size of Grand Lake. You take a Lake Fork, they don't have tournaments every weekend because of the giant slot limit. So there's the other thing that you got to remember too is, at least in Texas, there are lots and lots and lots of lakes. There's more freshwater lakes in Texas reservoirs, man-made reservoirs, than any other state. And even though there's lots of fishermen, they spread out.
Yeah.
And so, Sam Rayburn may have 100 or 250, 300 tournaments a year, but it's a huge reservoir. So it's a different scale. And that's kind of what the folks in Alabama were saying, that if this same study was done on Gunnersville, that's 65,000 acres, or Pickwick, or Smith Lake, or some of the bigger lakes, they're not seeing those same kind of trends as you do with these smaller lakes that have very high fishing pressure. And John lived down there, so he knows how busy that whole Coosa River system is from a tournament standpoint. Very, very popular destination.
How much do you think grass plays a part in that? Because the Coosa is not really grass, but Gunnersville and the TVA is.
Well, generally, habitat like that is more important for the survival of little fish and recruitment. So the production, and that's something that this study looked at, is there's still bass being spawned out and produced in those lakes. And they're growing relatively well. It's just when they get up to those bigger sizes is when they're starting to die at a little faster rate than what nature would have them dying, because the tournament mortality is a little more intense. And when you look at it on a number of boats per acre kind of a thing, that's where they're seeing the problem. It's really not so much a habitat thing. And of course, a lot of people say, well, all I got to do is stock more fish. Well, nature can do a way better job of putting more bass in those lakes than what the state can in terms of trying to stock fish. Because that's not the problem. It's not the small end of the spectrum. It's the big ones that are where they're having the problems. And so habitat is certainly good for recruitment, and whether it's grass or rock or whatever, but you got to have all the other components too to maintain the quality of that fishery. As those fish grow up and get bigger, they got to have the right kind of food and so on, and then mortality starts taking over. And that's something a lot of folks don't really understand. Most lakes, most reservoirs anywhere across the country with black bass populations, is that anywhere from 20 to 40% of them die every year, a given year class. Fish that are spawned out in 2023, 20 to 40% of those fish die before their first birthday. And then the next year, when they're 2 years old, another 20 or 30% die. And the next year, another 20 or 30% die of that particular year class. So when nature kind of limits how many pounds of fish the fishbowl can hold naturally. Well, then you start adding on some, I call it man-made mortality, whether it's from people keeping fish, harvesting them, taking them home to eat them, or from, in this case, tournament mortality. You start adding that all together. Now, nobody keeps bass to speak of anymore. The black bass harvest, other than some very special circumstances around the country, almost all the state agencies are saying that the harvest of black bass is only like 5%. So it's not people taking them home and eating them. Some people do, but it's not enough to make that kind of difference. So the Auburn study was, there's like 40% of the fish were dying after these tournaments. I think
So
40.
Devin had a good question, and maybe people don't understand how a study like that is, how they do a study like that. Devin's question was, if you don't see them, how do you know they're dying? Because they keep them in the cage or in some kind of.
Well, they used several different methods. There's the traditional method of looking at delayed mortality is you take fish that have gone through the tournament and you hold them in some sort of big net or pen or a pond or something like that. And you hold them for like a week and you see how many of them survive that process. But you also put some fish in there with them that maybe they catch by electrofishing, which really very low stress. They haven't gone through all of the tournament experience. You put them in there too, and they're all marked. They have little tags or something on them so you can tell which ones are which. So at the end of the week, you can count the bodies, and you can tell, okay, if we put some fish in this cage or this pond that have not gone through the tournament and none of them die, we know that just being in that cage or in that pond is not killing them. So that the ones that have gone through the tournament that die, you can pretty much say, yep, the tournament is what was the problem here, because the control fish that you put in there didn't die on you. What they did in Alabama too was that they tagged hundreds of fish after tournaments, and then they see through their sampling, whether it's electrofishing or from anglers catching and reporting, tags, how many of those tagged fish come back and get caught again, or sampled in their electrofishing surveys. So they have another way of checking to see if tournament caught fish are surviving and being recaptured one way or another. So they've kind of got some, redundant information there to try to get a better handle on how many of these fish are dying. And that's where they started to see that it tended to be more of the larger size fish, that the littler ones were not dying as often. And that was something that came out in a study, I don't know, 30 years ago, that some of the early mortality studies was that bigger fish die more easily than little fish when they've gone through a tournament. And they just stress more easily. And so their findings really weren't that unexpected. And then the numbers that they had, the 43%, was the average over the whole year. Obviously less in the cool months, more in the hot months. We did a mortality study here in Oklahoma back in 1994, 5, 6, in that range. And we had, some of our tournaments had like 5% mortality, almost none. And then we had one in particular that 70% of the fish died. But it was July and it was 104 degrees. And, nobody was using ice. The people weren't taking care of the fish. It was pretty obvious. So, but when you average all of that out over the course of the year, all the studies that have ever been done on delayed mortality, the average spring, summer, fall, every time, runs about 25, 28% of the fish die. And that's why for so long we said, it's not really hurting the population. The nature can replace that pretty quickly. But this study is showing that on these smaller lakes, the bigger fish are the ones that are taking the hit, and it takes a lot longer to replace them. So the study that they did was pretty comprehensive, and I don't have a lot of problems with how they did it, and even the results are like I say, are not unexpected. Our problem with the process is that they being Alabama Fisheries, didn't really reach out to all of the different stakeholder groups that are affected by this regulation proposal and try to get all the people together and come up with, something that maybe everybody could live with, some kind of a consensus that would help the fishing, but still allow, tournaments and the economic impact and those kind of things to play out. So that's kind of where we are on that.
Let's switch gears just a little bit, Gene.
Please.
I want to talk about natural mortality a little bit. And in very particular, I've heard the word largemouth bass virus quite a bit.
Yeah.
I've heard it a lot in these smaller lakes that I live around up here. And it seems like that's one of the only things that gets blamed from guys that, may not know any better, but they always point to, well, largemouth bass virus hit that lake, 6 years ago, and it's just now coming back from that. Can you kind of clear the air a little bit on some of that?
There's potentially some truth to that. Largemouth bass virus first started coming across the country back in the 90s. It actually started in Florida. They think it was a mutation of a virus that's found in like salamanders, and it got into the fish population, and viruses do what they do, they mutate, and it wound up being a virus that affects largemouth bass, although there's several other species of fish that can carry the virus, but they don't necessarily get sick from it. But it gradually kind of moved across the southeastern states, and you could watch the progression as it moved, and all the states started reporting, fish kills and the loss of especially the larger bass, and how some lakes were hit really hard. And when it's kind of like this length limit deal. When you crop off those larger fish, it takes time for them to grow back. But the fish, over some period of time, as nature does, fish will build up immunities to that virus. And in a lot of cases, the populations would rebound. But the virus doesn't completely go away in a lot of cases. And doing what viruses do, if it mutates a little bit, the immunities that those fish had built up, now they don't work. It's kind of like the flu. You get a flu shot and they say, well, the flu shot you got doesn't work against this strain of the flu because it's changed just a little bit. So next year you got to get a different flu shot. same kind of deal. The largemouth bass virus that we see now is very slightly different than what we saw 10, 15, 20 years ago. So it's still around under the right conditions, which I'm not sure anybody really knows what those conditions are. It can come back and have some impact. It showed up in smallmouth bass populations in Michigan, in Indiana. And they're actually in Michigan now, they've got some laws against moving fish from one lake to another. Wisconsin, Minnesota, some of those places, it's illegal to move fish from one body of water to another because they're afraid that you might potentially be introducing that virus to a population that's never had it before, and it could be devastating. And so, it's out there. It's not gone away, but it's not doing. We don't think that it's doing near the damage that it did originally because the fish are adapting to it pretty quickly. The immunities that fish have don't seem to be passed on to their offspring. So, the new spawn that comes along, they gotta deal with it on their own because their parents haven't passed on those immunities that the parents may have built up. So each new generation has to deal with it, and in some cases it could be having some impact. The thing that you got to think about though, and a lot of people blame largemouth virus on all kinds of other things that cause natural mortality. There's all sorts of other viruses and parasites and diseases and stuff that fish just die from. And like I said before, 20 to 40% of those of a given year class potentially is going to die every year from some kind of natural causes. They get eaten by somebody that's bigger than them, or some kind of disease or something like that gets a hold of them. And so they're always kind of be dealing with some of these things. So when fishing gets bad, and people see dead fish, or they see fish floating on the surface, or they have sores on them, or they have fungus patches or whatever, the largemouth bass virus kind of tends to be the first thing people think about.
Yeah.
And it may not have anything to do with that. The fish disease specialists would have to do some testing and stuff to find out if that's really what's going on. But when we had it hit our lakes in Oklahoma, we collected hundreds of bass and had them sent off for testing. And very seldom could you ever look at that fish and tell that there was anything wrong with it. So it didn't have a whole lot of external symptoms, because what it was doing, it would screw up internally, screw up like the swim bladder would get infected, and the virus would mess up their internal organs. Eventually, after that fish gets weak enough, then things like bacteria and fungus and parasites could attack the outside of the fish. But it usually was after the virus had weakened that fish's immune system so much that the other things that are already in the water, all those other things are already out there, would attack and show up, and you'd see fish with sores or parasites and that kind of stuff. But that's kind of a secondary symptom or infection. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Absolutely. It's great information. And you also answered one of our viewers' questions too, talked about trying to keep the fish in the body of water they were caught, not transporting them somewhere else. So yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And in some states where they've got there's several other kinds of viruses and things that don't care what kind of fish it is, they'll kill them all. There's some viruses, especially up north, that they are very strict about moving fish between bodies of water. And just beside the fact that it's, people wanting to stock their favorite lake with their favorite fish, sometimes there's unintended consequences, and bad things can happen.
Right. Makes total sense when you say it that way too.
Yeah.
I'm trying to read back through questions on 4 pages.
Oh, okay.
And it's funny because the longer we let you go, you keep answering more of the questions. So I don't want to slow your roll.
Well, just dig through them. I mean, that was kind of, the last time I was on, we kind of ran into this same thing. It's like, well, let's just run through the questions. I mean, fire away, and we'll see what we can see how many we can make out.
Well, okay. Switching gears. How about a random question? Gene, do you ever get to fish for fun?
Oh, yeah.
Good.
Bass hired me half time. The other half is mine.
Sweet.
So, yeah, I work from home, and that's been a real blessing that I can sit here, working on the computer, and I can look outside and say, okay, I don't need to do this right now, and take off. That little private lake that I mentioned earlier, it's not even 2 hours away. And my family farm is right at 2 hours away in Texas. So I keep a John boat down there. Whoa, boy, that one goes way back. That was probably 1970, 71, 2, something like that.
What kind of boat are you driving there?
That is a Skeeter Metro, a 15-foot Skeeter Metro. It had stick steering, and originally came had a 40-horse motor on it, a little Mercury. I saved all my money working at the hardware store and eventually bought a 65-horse motor for it. Man, we were styling. That particular picture is from a lake that's about 8 miles from where I grew up, a little small city lake. So, but yeah, I get to fish pretty regularly. Maybe not as much as I'd like, but like when we go to Florida next week, we've got 3 days between the 2 elite tournaments. And so my wife's going to go with me, and, we're going to try to set up fishing trips somewhere with somebody, saltwater, freshwater, or something. So, yeah, it's been a passion for a long, long, long time. That picture, I don't know if you could tell, I joined BASS in 1969. That's the second year that Bass was around. That picture, that's my life story in a picture right there. That is at the 1972 Bassmaster tournament at Lake Eufaula in Oklahoma that Roland Martin won. My father drove me and my buddy, the 2 guys that are on I'm on one side of Ray Scott and my buddy's on the other side. I think I was a freshman in high school, maybe. And 1972 was the first year that BASS did the Don't Kill Your Catch program, where they released the fish and didn't put them on stringers. And that tank behind us is the big trailer that had a big tank on them that they would put all the fish in after the weigh-in, and then drive it down to the boat ramp and release them. And so that's that photo was kind of foretelling my future.
You should thank your mom that she didn't give you a bowl cut like your buddy there.
I tell you that guy, he and I, he's passed away several years ago, but we basically taught each other to fish. We terrorized every farm pond in the county, and then when we got old enough to drive, it was joined a bass club, and we went to town.
You checking oxygen quality in that picture, Gene?
Yeah, one of the things that I do periodically at some of our tournaments is just monitor the water quality in the weigh-in tanks backstage, especially in the hot summer tournaments. And when we go up north and we've got smallmouth tournaments, in July and August, because smallmouth are much more sensitive to temperature and oxygen problems. So kind of have to stay on top of that kind of stuff. But, the system that Bass uses now has been in place for years and years and years because it works. And I don't normally have to really monitor things on a real, tournament to tournament basis. Obviously with Bass runs like 40 some odd tournaments a year all over the country. I can't I just go to very select number of them, half a dozen maybe in the course of the year. So it's it's just part of the job that I try to do. Yep, there's my wife. That wasn't on camera earlier. That's Pat. So she's become quite an avid angler now in the past 6 or 8 years. For the first 30 years we were married, she didn't really care much about fishing, and when she retired and started having time to go travel with me and go to tournaments and stuff, she became a bigger fan. And at some point she said, I really want to try more of this, the real fishing, not just watching fishing. And she's gotten pretty proficient. She caught let's see, what is today? This is Tuesday. Last Thursday, we were on a small lake, and we caught about 30 bass, and she caught one that was 7.95.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, she's in fact, I think she changed her Facebook page picture to holding up that new 7, almost 8 pounder.
Two of the best in the business right there.
Yeah. That was our induction class for the Hall of Fame. It's me and Tripp and Jason Lucas, who was the fishing editor for Sports Afield magazine. He passed away many, many years ago, but he was in that same class at the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame. What else? One thing I did notice, John, you asked about the oxygen systems.
Yeah.
I see a comment there. We've got a new sponsor now that just came on with Bass, this Piranha O2 oxygen generating devices that they're in the medical oxygen business. You see people that carry these oxygen generators with them, and obviously hospitals have oxygen generators where you take air and you squeeze out all of the stuff that isn't oxygen, and you 21% or whatever it is that comes out on the other end is pure oxygen. And we're going to be experimenting with their devices this year. In fact, at St. John's River, in next week, we're going to be testing some of their products in our backstage tanks, and they make a version that fits in a bass boat as well. And there's another one on the market too called a fish lung that they make a device that fits in your boat that generates basically pure oxygen, which is part of the solution. Temperature control is still an important component. It's like the live well additives, the chemicals and stuff that a lot of people sell. We don't recommend any of them, but people assume that, well, all I've got to do is pour this stuff in my live well and the fish will be fine. And they don't think about the need for temperature control and oxygen, which are really the more critical things that you have to deal with. So it's all part of the education process, is convincing anglers that they've got to take better care of their fish. And these oxygen generating devices, they're a little pricey right now. I think obviously as the more anglers decide to go that route, the prices may come down. But they do a really good job of providing oxygen for a live well, or in our case, we're looking at our weigh-in tanks and release boats and stuff like that to see if they can help us out, on at the weigh-in side of things. But so they're the older versions that a lot of people are familiar with, the little round discs, that the oxygenators that are mounted in the live wells. They're on the small side to really be able to produce enough oxygen by themselves to keep your fish healthy, especially if you've got a big load of fish, lots of pounds of fish in a live well. They're a good supplement, but you got to have a good aeration system as well to make that work. And that's where these pure oxygen systems have kind of evolved over the years. For a long time, we recommended people getting an oxygen bottle. I've got one in my boat. It's about the size of a fire extinguisher, about that big around, about yay long. And it's got a little regulator on it and an air stone that puts out little teeny tiny little micro bubbles. And those have been around for, 20 years or more. But these new devices are, rather than a bottle of oxygen, they actually just basically take air and run it through a special filter that strips out the nitrogen and other stuff and leaves the oxygen coming out on the other end that goes through the air stone into the live well. So they've got a lot of promise. I think when at some point when they get the prices where people can really think about affording something like that. Obviously for tournament anglers where every ounce counts, keeping those fish alive is it's an investment. But I don't think we're there yet for the masses, but give it time. It's a kind of an economy of scale. Once they start selling lots of them, then the prices are potentially be coming down. And, then it's something where maybe even at some point, some of the boat companies decide that, maybe this is something we could add as an option when somebody buys a new boat, that this might be something they could add in. I don't know where that's gonna go.
Yeah, we saw the announcement of the partnership or sponsorship or whatever you want to call it. Just wasn't sure if they tested them on any of the events that had already happened, but you answered that.
Yeah, our first one's going to be next week at St. John's River. So far, I think their testing has been more laboratory, ton of stuff. Because the first ones they came out with, I saw them at ICAST 2 years ago. The box itself is not much bigger than a small tackle box, and it generates enough oxygen, for a live well. But we're talking about backstage where we've got a 150-gallon tank, so they've had to engineer this thing to work on our waiting line tank system that we have backstage, where we've got 12 of these 150-gallon Rubbermaid tanks. So they've had to scale things up to be able to hopefully make that work. We'll find out next week how.
Are they doing a box for each tank, or are they doing one big box that does like 3 or 4 tanks?
I think, yeah, I think it's a box for multiple tanks, and is what I haven't seen the final version yet, so I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, and but you know, if they work, and we keep our oxygen levels good, especially where I really think it can help us is, like I say, in the hot weather tournaments and in those smallmouth tournaments where the oxygen levels can get pretty critical when you've got really hot weather. And you know, we always use a lot of ice in those situations to maintain our water temperatures about 7 or 8 degrees below whatever the lake is. And but even at that, especially with smallmouth, they use a lot more oxygen per fish. And so when the guys have got fish in the tanks and they got bags of, you know, these 20 and 25 pound bags of smallmouth, the oxygen levels can sag quite a bit with our conventional air system. So the oxygen supplement, I think, could be a really good benefit there. And on our release boats, where we already use we use bottled oxygen on our release boats. If we don't have to have all the clunky bottles and stuff, having to worry about refilling them and all that kind of stuff, that could be a real benefit too. So I think there's a lot of promise in it. That like I say, the 2 companies that are out there right now, I think they've got some, you know, there'll be some growing pains, but I think there's some potential there.
I think it was Devin asked a question way back, and I kind of think I know the answer, but I'll let you answer. The question was, what's more important, temperature or oxygen?
Well,
In your live wells, I'm talking about.
Oxygen ultimately is, because if the oxygen level drops below a certain threshold, even if the temperature is right, then it can be lethal. So, you know, ultimately that's the situation for keeping fish alive short term. It's the temperature issues tend to impact the delayed mortality a little more. If the fish are kept in a situation where they're you know, being cold-blooded animals, the warmer the water, their metabolism gets revved up higher and higher, and so they're already under stress, and so you put them in hot water situation for a long period of time, then that can kind of messes up their internal physiology to where they potentially will die several days later. And in fact, one of the studies that was done not too long ago, just a few years ago, showed that when the water temperatures get over, I want to say it was like 84 degrees under tournament conditions, that like 2 or 3 out of 5 bass may not survive. You know, there may be, you know, delayed mortality. There's kind of an upper threshold. Now, I know we've all caught bass in water that was, at least on our sonar unit, the temperature said the surface was, you know, 90 degrees. And those fish have kind of acclimated to that. But if you take a fish that's, you know, caught in 80-degree water and you put him in a live well, and the water in your live well heats up and heats up and heats up over the day to get up to that 90-degree temperature, then that's what's screwing them up. And that's where the ice situation is more critical, that you need to maintain those temperatures. But the oxygen kind of goes hand in hand. If you've got a big load of fish, and it's one of the things that these oxygen generating systems potentially can help with is, if you've got a big load of fish, let's say you've got 20 or 25 pounds of bass in a live well that holds 30 gallons of water, those fish are potentially using oxygen faster than your aeration system can put it back. Because for the most part, your aeration system is just pumping in air, and air is only 21% oxygen. So there's a lot of that air that doesn't help the fish any. You're blowing lots of bubbles, but the bubbles don't have that much real oxygen in them. And so that's where the oxygen supplementing can help. Plus, that's why we try to recommend the ice and the cooling, because when you cool that water a little bit, it slows the fish's metabolism just a little bit, and the cooler water tends to hold more oxygen. So the hotter the water, the less oxygen it naturally holds anyway. So if you cool it down 7-8 degrees, it's going to hold a little bit more oxygen. We always, back to one of the things you were asking Kyle earlier, just basics of live well care. Don't put them all in one side of the live well. Spread them out. Keep your fish divided if you've got a 2-compartment live well, so that there's more water per fish, that sort of thing. And in really hot weather, you don't want to be pumping in that 90-degree surface water. That's when we try to recommend you just go to a recirculating system, put your ice in there, and monitor them that way. And something that people have always been concerned with, especially when they have dealing with ice, is the chlorine that's potentially in that ice. One of our colleagues at Texas Parks and Wildlife a couple of years ago, they tested commercial ice, and the amount of chlorine in ice is so small that it doesn't matter. You're not going to hurt the fish. And a lot of people freeze water in milk bottles or pop bottles or something like that, and that's fine, as far as putting that in your live well to cool your water. But you can use block ice or crushed ice. It's not, the chlorine in it is not a problem.
Gene, do you have any good places to look on Bassmaster, or maybe some videos or something a guy could look at as far as how to properly fizz the 3 different species of bass?
We've only got 2. We don't have one for 3 species, but we've got a smallmouth and a largemouth video.
Okay.
Again, go to bassmaster.com, go to the search bar, put in fizzing smallmouth bass, and it will bring up, and then you look at, and then there's a little box you got to check for videos. And there's a video there that we shot in New York several years ago with Barb Elliott, who goes through the whole process of the problem, why you want to do it, why you need to fizz your fish, when you need to fizz them, and how. And she goes through that entire process. And cool. Then there's a companion video to that. If you'll do the search and put in fizzing largemouth bass, and it will bring up the video that shows. And really the only difference is the location, the target of where you want to stick the needle. it's a little bit different between smallmouth and largemouth. The landmarks you use to where you want to put the needle in the fish. But that first video with the smallmouth has the whole description of why it's important and how you go about the procedure.
Awesome.
It also talks a little bit about the fact that we do not recommend fizzing through the mouth, which a lot of people learned to do several years ago because they thought it was a little easier. But studies have shown now that those fish can bleed internally and the mortality is significantly higher for fish that are fizzed through the mouth. So going through the side, there's not much you can mess up. And it's a relatively easy procedure once you've done it a few times. We started training all of our Elite Series anglers. The new crop of elites that come in each year, we make them go through a fizzing training class. And Barb Elliott actually helped out with a college training class last year too, for up on the St. Lawrence River. Because with those smallmouth, it's especially when they're catching these fish 30, 40, 50 feet deep sometimes. Spotted bass are kind of in between. They tend to be a little bit more like largemouth in terms of the landmarks and where you would fizz them as far as the location, but the actual technique is the same for all three species. It's just the location of where you stick the needle.
Cool.
Gene, on that subject, what about fin clips versus fizzing?
Fin clips don't cure the problem.
Right.
When the swim bladder swells up, bass can't burp. So the gas that's inside the swim bladder doesn't just go away right away. And when that swim bladder is really swollen up, especially if fish are caught really deep, that swim bladder really expands a lot. It puts a lot of pressure on the other internal organs and the blood vessels and the heart. And so it's hindering blood flow. And I mean, I've seen fish that are so swollen up that they quit breathing. So if you put fin clips on them, all that does is holds them right side up. Now it's good in the fact that they're not struggling all the time, because a lot of times when they need fizzing, they go to the bottom and then they come back to the top, and then they struggle to go back down, and then they float back up. And they do that so much they just get worn out. So the fin clips tend to hold them down so where they're not struggling as much. The problem is, like I say, it doesn't cure the overinflated swim bladder that's doing the damage internally. And so that's why we recommend people fizzing their fish fairly quickly in the boat and not putting clips on them and just waiting until the weigh-in and let the tournament staff do it, because by then the damage is a lot of it's already been done.
Sure.
For those fish. So the fin clips can help in some respects, but they don't cure the problem. And so it's there's some good to them, but again, they don't do the same thing that proper fizzing does.
Cool. John's just gonna sit there and try not to cough.
Yeah. Trying not to cough. I mean, we could sit here and listen to Gene all night long, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
I was thinking about stuff we could ask him, and we'd be here till midnight.
Did we run out of viewer questions?
I think you answered most of them.
I think so.
Okay. Okay.
There was a question a while back about the Florida strain bass in
Oh yeah.
Texas versus the fish they're stocking in Grand.
Oh, okay. The F1s. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Florida bass were brought to California back in the 50s, and you know all about the explosion of giant bass that happened in California. So a bunch of other states, Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, a lot of other states stocked Florida bass in an effort to produce more trophy fish. And the key here is not more fish, more big fish. It's a genetic, it's an effort to influence the genetics and get fish in the lake that have the potential to grow to trophy size. So Texas and their Sherlunker program with the selective breeding they've done has taken the biggest and baddest fish and crossed them with each other, and what they stock now are basically pure Floridas. Oklahoma stocks a lot of them. Arkansas stocks a lot of them. A lot of the states across the southeast are stocking Florida bass. But as you move north, you got to remember that a Florida bass evolved in subtropical Florida. So as you move north, you wind up with a significantly different climate and a much shorter growing season. So that even if you've got the perfect Florida bass, there's places like Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, whatever, that if the fish could survive the winters at all, the growing season is going to be too short. The situation is just so different that the genetics might be right, but the environment won't let those fish grow to the maximum size that they have the potential of growing to. Go to Texas, you got a much longer growing season. So enter the F1, which is half northern, half Florida. So it's the largemouth bass, and of course now the genetic guys have renamed everything. So it's not the northern largemouth bass or the Florida strain. It is the largemouth bass and the Florida bass. Okay. Anyway, an F1 is a half and half. It's the hybrid between the two. And the concept there is that you've got a fish that has the potential of growing big from the Florida side, and the largemouth side has the potential to withstand the cooler weather and the climate better. So now you've got a fish that might have more potential of producing trophy size fish. And every state that's stocking the F1s, the definition of a trophy is a little bit different. In some states, a trophy bass may be 10 pounds. In some state, it may be 8 pounds. In some, it may not even that. But right now, as I recall, Virginia, North Carolina, maybe Tennessee, Oklahoma are stocking some of these F1 fish. There is a commercial hatchery in Alabama that produces them all, so they got to buy them because none of the states are really geared up for making their own. So they buy these fish from a commercial hatchery in Alabama, and they pay about $1 a piece for them, and they're about that big. So, you stock 100,000 of these things, and you hope that 5 or 10% of them survive, and don't become somebody else's lunch. And B, to grow them up to what we consider a trophy, like in Oklahoma, that's 8 pounds, it's going to take 7 or 8 years. So it's kind of a long-term gamble. Virginia's been doing it the longest. They've stocked some of the rivers. The Chickahominy in particular has, they've seen some pretty decent results. North Carolina's doing probably the most comprehensive study on them. They've stocked them in 2 or 3 different kinds of lakes. One lake that's pretty infertile and I wouldn't say sterile, but doesn't have a lot of good growth rates. They've got one that's kind of in between, and another lake that's just gangbusters, very, very productive. So they want to see, the difference in these fish, how they produce. But it's a long-term thing. They stock them and you wait, and they go back and they sample, and over the course of 2 or 3 or 5 or 7 or 10 years, you hope that you see results. And that's in Texas, they've been stocking Florida bass. A lot of the lakes that have produced these, especially the sharelunker fish, some of them are relatively new lakes where they were stocked when the lake was fairly young, or when the lake was really low and then it filled back up, like after a big long drought, which happened at OHIV. And those kind of situations, it's almost like a new lake. There's tremendous flush of productivity. You got all kinds of forage. You got all this new habitat. Not a lot of competition for food. The fish grow like crazy. But as you go further north, you take a lake like Grand that's been around 75 years. It's got an established bass population. You go in there and you stock fish. Like I said earlier, nature says the fish bowl can only hold so many pounds of fish. So if they come in, if ODWC comes in and says, okay, we're going to put 90,000 of these in there, they hope 90,000 native bass that are that big die out. They want to swap out the native fish for these F1s that potentially can grow to become 8-pounders someday. Because nature says, I'm not going to allow more bass. So if you put this many in, something's got to give. So we're going to get rid of some of those other ones so that these little guys have a chance to grow up and become trophy fish someday. So all of those stocking programs, even the ones in Texas where, people just talk about stocking. It's a genetic manipulation. It's not geared to putting more bass in the lake. It's a thing trying to influence the numbers of big fish. And the F1s are it's an experiment now that Grand Lake, some of the lakes in North Carolina, and I think they're talking about maybe in Tennessee and maybe in Kentucky. We're right on that kind of that northern boundary of where nature may or may not allow these fish to do well. It's too early to tell. So there you go.
Crazy.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, I'm with John. I love that we have the ability to give you this platform to just free roll and answer questions. I could, because I can sit here literally and listen to you talk about anything for another 6 hours.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well,
I appreciate
it.
You're a very good communicator, and that's there are people that speak well, that can come out with a practiced speech and present the information. But you speak well, you communicate effectively, and I learn so much every time I listen to you.
Well, the Outdoor Oklahoma TV show. Gosh, I can't remember how many dozens of episodes that I helped with doing something on the TV show, and I don't remember any of them. We hardly ever had to do a second take. it just comes out.
Well, good.
Well, I mean, we enjoy having you, and well, I'm sure we'll have you on again.
I would love it. Yeah, just that's great.
Especially when it warms up a little bit, and we need to reiterate the fish care and so forth. We'd love to have you back on when it gets that time of year. And we just appreciate you coming on.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, and yeah, maybe when it warms up a little bit, I can come up there to Grand Lake, John. And we can do it. We can do the show from the comfort of the Lake Lodge, and then maybe we can go fishing.
Absolutely, we'd love that. We'd love that. Good talking to you, Gene, and we will let you go. We got a little bit of business to take care of after you exit, but we've been on here over an hour and a half with you.
Yeah.
And we probably got another half an hour. We could go another half an hour if we wanted to, but I know Kyle's, he's the youngest one of the bunch, but he's got to get to bed the earliest.
No, that's me.
Oh,
It's dark out. It's time to go to bed.
well, you're not the youngest.
Maybe at heart.
Yeah. Thank you, Gene, for tuning in.
Yeah,
For
thank
coming
you.
on.
Guys, and just let me know, and we'll do it again in the future. Thanks a lot.
Have
Thank
fun
you.
in Florida.
All right.
Enjoy the warm weather.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Oh, the master.
That was great.
I had to cut it off somewhere because the more he talked, the more questions I thought of, and I'm like, we could talk all night.
Make some
Oh.
notes for next time.
Yep.
Good idea to have him back maybe during the break of summer, or just after 4th of July, or
Yeah.
in there somewhere where it's really heating up everywhere.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, real quick, I'm going to throw this on screen. This is the part where you guys can scan this QR code and go like our YouTube page.
Oh, nice.
So
Hello. Well done. Well
Yeah.
done, Mr. Crane.
you can scan that and it'll take you right there. Already tested it.
Sweet. We're so close. We're so close to being monetized. So people need to go like, subscribe,
Yep.
tell all your buddies, share, all that good stuff.
I think if all of our Facebook followers would go over there and do the same on YouTube, that would be helpful.
Yes.
So our Facebook's growing decently, so
Yeah.
we can get those over there as well. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
And speaking of Facebook, sharing, I never considered that sharing the live, to a different page. Like we do it live from the idle zone and it shares immediately to Kansas Bass Nation. Well, then as soon as we're live, I share it to my outdoors page and I share it to my personal page. And it never occurred to me that there could be different viewers from each page commenting that we wouldn't see. I thought we would see all comments on the comments section. So
The comments are
hopscotching
uncertain.
around a little bit, trying to keep up with questions. But Gene's so thorough. He covered probably 90% of them.
Mm-hmm.
So And listening to Gene talk about big fish just takes my mind off the fact that the wind is howling through the north window here.
Yep.
So what business do we need to take care of?
He's talking to himself.
Oh, John is muted.
I gotta unmute.
There you go.
We didn't really talk about any of the local stuff, tournaments. BFL was down here this last weekend. 22 pounds, first place. A couple listeners, watchers, whatever you want to call them. Brandon
Several.
Ackerson.
Several.
Yeah, several fished it. And Brandon, I'm probably going to miss some, but Brandon Ackerson, 22nd. Alex Torkelson, 23rd. Had some co-anglers stay with us. Kibby, Richard Kiblinger stayed with us, and he fished. I don't think he caught any fish, but he was here. Toyota Series was the last week too. You look at the top 10 in that Toyota Series, and it's like all college kids. I mean, it's, that I met in college. Dylan's nut, 30-pound bag on the final day, 84 pounds for 3 days. And there were several college kids in the top 10. Upcoming tournaments, we got the Bassmaster Open that we'll look out for this weekend. Starts Thursday. Got the Toyota Series on Okeechobee that starts Thursday. I mean, fishing is ramping up. Next week is the Elite. Next week's the Elite. The MLF starts Thursday on the Harris Chain. BPT. It's crazy.
Oh, I missed one. Sorry. Circling back to Grand, Sean Clark finished 7th.
Yes. Yep.
Wanted to shout out to him.
That's right. He was on here watching. So that brings me to, because the Elite is next week, I did set up a Idle Zone Syndicate Fantasy League for all of our listeners, and maybe we can post the password. It's a private group. I decided to keep it private. We don't want a bunch of non-listeners out listening, playing.
Yeah.
We want it for our guys. So, and maybe we'll come up with some kind of prize. Maybe if we can figure something out throughout the season. But I've set it up, and I set it up for both games, the Elite Series and the Drain the Lake. And the password is Lake Lodge Grand. Capital L on the lake. First letter is capital, everything else is lowercase. Lake Lodge Grand. And it's just the Idle Zone Syndicate Fantasy. Get your teams ready for next week at the St. John's. And we'll
Is
see
that
how
right, John? Down there?
Yes.
Yep, that's
Okay.
right. And I mean, Kyle's already been talking smack about how good he did, how he would have won the whole thing last year in the national thing. But he forgot to fill in his team on the last tournament. So we'll see how it goes. And maybe we can, when does it lock up? When do the picks lock in?
Thursday morning at like some crazy
Yeah,
time.
like a week from Thursday. We got like 7 or 8 days.
Well, the morning of the tournament is what I was saying. So, like, if
Yeah,
the Elite
so-
Series starts on Thursday at
So
6
amongst
a.m.,
our,
it starts before that.
so if we want to prognosticate and tell our picks, we have to agree amongst ourselves that we can't change them after we give our picks.
Yeah, I'm not.
Because you can't change them to you can't change them to what I'm picking, and I can't change them to what you're picking. Because they won't be locked at that time. When we're on the idle zone, they won't be locked.
No, they're not. And mine usually don't get locked in until Wednesday night before I go to bed.
Well, then you can't prognosticate. I mean, if we're going to prognosticate, make it part of the show, it's not fair to change them after we tell everybody who we're picking and then we go change them.
Fair. That's fair.
So you got to agree. We got to agree amongst ourselves that after Tuesday night, you can't change. Once you tell everybody what you're picking, you can't change them.
Or maybe we do. How many do you get to pick? Because I haven't done it before, but I'll do it this year.
Yeah, I haven't done it for like 6 or 7 years.
I mean, or we could do this, or we could do this.
Just give one that's one lock that you do for the
Yeah.
week. So
No,
you're making your one
or-
lock pick.
Or you can make two teams. Like you can make two. You can have more than one team. Like I can do John Stewart 65, and these are my picks, and I can do John Stewart 66, and these are my picks. And the one that we're going to prognosticate on gets locked in on Tuesday night, and the other one you can change right up until the last minute if you want to do that. You just have to designate which one is your Tuesday night lock-in one. Kyle Kister 1 is your Tuesday night lock-in, and Kyle Kister 2 is your Thursday morning lock-in or Wednesday night. I mean, it's one day. It's Tuesday. Kyle.
If you're so good, you shouldn't need that much extra time to think about it, right?
Yeah.
It's one day, 24 hours.
I feel like maybe there needs to be a wager.
If there's going to be a wager, there has to be a lock-in on Tuesday night.
Well, you can tell he's a tournament director for a long time.
You're not gonna gray area this and change it.
Oh, my goodness. When would I have ever gray areaed anything as I have both of my fingers crossed like that?
There are 3 games you can play in fantasy fishing, but there's only 2. You can only do 2 in a league. The other one's just a pick 'em. It's like a pick 'em tournament thing, where you pick this guy or that guy, and then you pick this guy or that guy. They give you the ones you have to pick from, and everybody.
Yep. A, B, C, D, and E. So I believe there's 5 buckets, and then you get to pick the weight.
That's in the regular one, but there's a new game this year. There's a new game this year where it's just a pick 'em. Like they give you 2 to pick from, John Stewart or Kyle Kister, and you have to pick one of them 2.
Oh, that'd be easy.
Yep, Kyle Kister.
It's black or white. I mean, at least you don't have 20 different anglers to pick out of each bucket.
Yeah.
True.
One or the other.
Yeah, one of you.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I've done all 3 of them. I've got my teams picked, but next Tuesday we
How in
will.
the world do you already have your guys picked for 2 weeks from now or a week from now?
Well, I do too.
Crapshoot.
No, it's no.
Maybe Kister's gonna give up the juice a little bit here on the.
He'll do that after the season's over, and then be
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
give some tips and tricks after he's won his prize.
No, I study every lake and past histories and tendencies and everything.
Okay.
Mm-mm. Maybe one bucket out of the 5 would I just go click, and that's like if Greg Hackney's having a good season, he just gets clicked every single time, just immediately.
Yeah, we'll see.
I'm in. I dig it.
I got my accounts made, and I'm in the group now. So
I mean, they're going
Once we give our teams, they are locked.
to a lake they've been to a few times right now. So the veterans that are on the elites actually have a little bit of a, a leg up going into this event. So
Once we give our teams on Tuesday night, they're locked.
I
That's
think
the
maybe
rule.
he's wanting me to shake my head yes too. I guess I will.
That's the rules. I'm making the rules. I made it. And I will write them down when you give them, so you can't change.
Even though it's recorded on a live video.
So again, for the viewers, go to your fantasy fishing. Under the private section, search Idle Zone Syndicate, capital L, Lake Lodge Grand, and enter.
Yep.
And we'll see who wins this thing.
It'll be fun. It'll be fun. Take us out of here, Kyle.
Oh, just
Boy.
one second. 1 second.
You got more?
Yes, quickly. Just a reminder of the Kansas Bass Nation spring meeting at Russell Marine Products headquarters in El Dorado. Business meeting will start at 10:30 a.m. sharp, and lunch provided. Be Two Brothers Barbecue. So that's rain or shine, snow, ice, whatever happens.
Good point.
But it is offered virtually. So if we do have a big giant whatever tonight and tomorrow and then again Friday night and Saturday now in the forecast, guys can jump on the Teams meeting and participate that way. Okay, now we can go.
Okie dokie.
Take us out.